Οπότε τώρα ήρθε η ώρα να καλωσορίσουμε τη Lesli Johnson, η οποία είναι ψυχοθεραπεύτρια και οικογενειακή σύμβουλος. Θα πει περισσότερα και η ίδια φυσικά για το προφίλ της. Ζει στην Καλιφόρνια, στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες και ειδικεύεται μεταξύ άλλων σε θέματα γονεϊκότητας και υιοθεσίας, καθώς είναι και η ίδια υιοθετημένο άτομο. So, Lesli, welcome and thank you very much. The floor is to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. I wish I was actually there in Greece, but I'm here in California. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the work that I do. Then I'm going to do a short presentation. And then I want to open it up to questions from you, because what I've found in presentations is that's kind of where we can really learn from each other. I want to be able to ask, or I want you to be able to ask any questions you have, and then I can share the information with you. And I was also we were all talking a little bit before I came on, and after we finish, and based on the questions you have for me, I will work on some resources to give to you, rather than just presenting you at the beginning with some kind of generic resources. I want to tailor it to what you are actually looking for in terms of support and resources. So like I said, there's going to be plenty of time after I talk for you all to answer any or ask any questions that you have. I do use notes, so if you see me look down, it's because I'm looking at my notes. Like Fassia said, my name is Lesli Johnson. I am a licensed therapist and coach. I live in Los Angeles, California, specifically Pasadena. And I work with the adoption and foster care community. That is former foster youth, adoptees of all ages, adoptive parents, prospective adoptive parents, and also first parents. So part of the reason that I work with this community is based on my own experience as an adopted person. So I was born a very long time ago, in 1967, and my birth mother got pregnant, and she and my biological father wanted to parent me, but their parents did not want that to happen. So such was the time. This period of time was called the baby scoop era, when women, before birth control, and when women got pregnant, and their parents decided they weren't going to allow their children to be parents, they would send birth moms away to give birth, and supposedly, it was for the best for the child. Excuse me. And afterward, birth mom could just return to life and would eventually forget the event, and baby would grow up and not know as well. And what we know now, that's absolutely not the case. But I was born, my birth mother, actually before I was born, hid my pregnancy for many months. She was sent away and gave birth to me without anyone familiar around. She didn't get to hold me. She did get to see me, but she didn't get to hold me. I was placed in foster care, and I was there for about 3.5 months. And because California is one of the many states in the United States that still has sealed birth records. So adult adoptees aren't allowed to have access to their original birth certificates in almost, I think it's many states are opening up now, but California is still one that our records are sealed. So I don't know where I was for 3.5 months. I presume that I was with one single foster family. And then I was adopted by my parents, and grew up with an adoptive brother who's not genetically related to me. And we were told we were adopted. My parents let us know. I don't remember a big sit down when they disclosed that, but they never really talked about what adoption was. So we knew what the word adoption meant, but we didn't really have a nuanced understanding. So I often wondered, were my birth parents coming back? Like, was I just in my adoptive family's home, for a short period of time, and I really loved my family. So that caused me a lot of anxiety. I wondered if my birth mother, why she couldn't take care of me, what was wrong with me. So we think about children and they're egocentric by nature. So they think things happen, smaller children think things happen because of them. So I wondered if if I had done something as a baby that caused her to make that decision. So I wondered, how going to school, I wondered how I was going to complete some of these projects. I'm guessing probably there too, but the family tree is a big project for kids that are in elementary age, in elementary school. So where you have a tree and kind of, it's an ancestry project. And what was I going to do? How was I going to do that without knowing my biology? I wondered who I looked like. I didn't have any pictures of my birth family growing up. So I had a lot of anxiety growing up. I still have some anxiety. You can tell in my voice, especially when I'm speaking in front of a bunch of people on Zoom. My parents sent me to therapy when I was 7. I was experiencing anxiety, separation anxiety, some somatic symptoms. The therapist, I went twice. Adoption was never mentioned. And I returned to therapy in my 20s after my parents divorced, and was in therapy for almost a year before I even mentioned that I was adopted. So again, this was perhaps the time, but also I think what part of what your organization is doing and what I do as a therapist in my attempts to educate educators, medical professionals, is we need to ask questions so that adoptees are able to say, yeah, I'm here because I was adopted, and I think it has something to do with my anxiety. We need people to help us connect those dots, parents, teachers, and therapists. So it wasn't until I was in graduate school and studying to become a therapist that I really started to recognize, oh wow, maybe the fact that I was separated from my birth mother at birth did have an impact on my life. Maybe that was part of the reason that I, struggled with trust and struggled with anxiety. So that's when I took a deep dive and really started to connect the dots of my own adoption story. And it's also a big reason why I now work with this community today, is so that other people will have a different experience than I had. So what I'm going to share with you is based on an article I wrote a few years ago, and I'm going to add different examples from my own work with the adoption community. But it's 10 things adoptees want you to know, and it's 10 of probably 10,000, but these are the ones that have stood out again in my work with young adoptees, teenagers, and adult adoptees. So the first one is, adoptees want their adoptive parents and their adoptive families to do their work around adoption and adoption-related issues. It's so helpful, and you all are a great example of doing just that, getting information and resources so that you can be an advocate for your child. So it's really helpful when adoptive parents have done their own work before adopting or early on. And it's really helpful too when they continue to do ongoing work and they're curious about their own experience as it relates to adoption. Families just will benefit more as parents continue to get support. Like Vasya said, this is a lifelong journey, and different things happen at different stages in the adopted person's life, in the adoptive family's life. One thing I really recommend is that adoptive parents need to fully grieve their inability to conceive, if that was the reason they chose to make their family by adoption, because an adoptive child isn't a substitute for a biological child or a replacement for a child who's died, but adoption is another way to make a family. Adoptive parents need to be willing to talk about race and culture of their child if it's different than their own, and acknowledge that their child had a past before they came to their family. A lot of times parents that I work with say, well, I don't see color you know, I don't see color. But really what you're saying, if you say that and your child is a different race than yours, you're saying, I don't see you. So we want to make sure that we acknowledge difference. Difference is okay. Difference is accepted. And adoptive parents can access support, again, like this group, support of other adoptive parents, and learn again from each other. So the next item that adoptees want you to know is that our experience is real and sometimes painful. So I know with parents, it's hard to see your child suffer, right? You want to fix it. But what you can't do is fix something or change something that happened again before your child came to your family. But what you can do is acknowledge and empathize and be there for your child, and put words sometimes to their experience if they don't have the words for it, to help them understand what might be might be happening. To be compassionate, to be present. Adopted kids need a really safe place to explore some of their fears, their anxieties, their thoughts. And as adoptive parents, you're your child's best advocate. I really can't say that enough. Parents are you are your child's best advocate. So in being that advocate, parents will often ask me, well, do we need to talk about the hard things? Do I need, you know, my child's birth father is in jail, or my child was conceived by rape. Do I need to tell her that? And my answer is a wholehearted yes. However, we're not going to talk to kids about these hard subjects until they understand the concepts, right? So I'm a firm advocate in truth and transparency, but we do it in an age-appropriate way. And so in my work, I help parents all the time with the language and the way and the timing of how to talk about these difficult subjects. Because the truth is, in today's world, if you know something about your child and I know something about your child, and we have the internet, they're going to eventually find out, right? So that might be, I just met with a new family met by computer with some new adoptive parents this week, and they were struggling because their child has 2 older half sisters, and they wonder if they should tell him and when they should tell him. He's very little now, but the point is, yes, truth and transparency. Everyone gets to know their story, even the hard parts, and we want that information to come from parents. We want you to be the funnel for the information, because what happens when you leave things out is later your kids will say, huh, why didn't you tell me that? And what else didn't you tell me? So the truth is your friend, even the hard stuff, and there are ways to talk about any subject. That's okay. So that's not to answer. So when kids have questions, that's not to say that you have to answer every question on the spot. It's absolutely okay if your child asks something and you're kind of caught off guard, to say, gosh, I can, honey, I can see that's really important question that you have. And I need to think about it. I need to think about that. I need to talk to mommy. I need to talk to daddy. I need to call a therapist. And that's okay. But let your child know that you're going to answer it, and tell them when. Let me think about that. And let's talk about this more at dinner tonight. So you're letting your child know that in an indirect way, you're letting them know you need to kind of collect your thoughts. And what this does is avoid blurting something out or saying something, it just gives you an opportunity to present a more well thought out answer if you get activated when they have asked you something. And I also want to say that conversations, a lot of times parents will say to me, my child knows they were adopted. We told them when they were 5. We told them they can ask us questions whenever they have them, whenever questions come up. That's fine. But really talking about adoption and separation and loss, it needs the conversations need to be parent driven, and they need to happen a lot, right? So it's not just one big conversation. In fact, that's ill-advised. It's a lot of little conversations, kind of like, when you're talking to kids about sex, right? So kids don't generally want to remember the day that their parents told them about the birds and the bees. But if you're presenting, bits of information along the way, it's much more easier for kids to take in. And the same goes with adoption. So, and like I said, parents bringing it up, because the message that gives is, wow, my parents are okay talking about this. This isn't going to upset my parents. This isn't going to hurt them if I talk about my biological family. They're okay with this. And that is really reassuring to a child and to a teenager too. And trust me, if you're bringing it up and they may say, oh, gosh, this isn't about adoption. And they're going to let you know if you're bringing it up too much, but err on that side rather than not talking about it. So the next point is an adopted person needs help to make sense of their story. So again, healing in terms of that separation loss, healing occurs with repetition of a story. So all kids like to hear their origin stories. So, create what's called a life book. That is it's like a scrapbook, but it's from the point of view of the child. So there might be pictures of birth family. There might be pictures of foster family, There might be pictures of birth country. And again, parents create it from the perspective of their child until the child's old enough to add information on their own. And again, there's templates for life books. I think the website is lifebooks.org, but essentially it's a scrapbook, but from the child's perspective that includes information before they came to your family. Even if that was just, even if they were adopted at birth, they still had a history before they came to their adoptive family. The other way that we help adopted children make sense of their story is have books about adoption in their choices of books. There are a lot of children's books that talk about ways we form family, adoption. I'm happy to provide some if you would like that too, some resources there. Adoptees need help with the language, with how do we handle when we're at the supermarket and people make such silly comments, and I don't think it's out of meanness. I think it's out of not being educated. So if your child is a different race than you, someone at this, people still say things like, oh, where did you come from? Or, you don't look like your mom, or you do look like your mom. So we want to practice. I'll have parents and kids role play. So when someone comes up to you and says, oh, when your child's at school and they say, oh, you were adopted, who's your real mom? Well, I have a mom who takes care of me, and I also have a birth mom. If your child wants to be the person that educates someone else, it's also okay for them to say that's my private information, that's my private business. But we want to help kids have the language so they feel empowered and not embarrassed by being adopted, but also that they don't get upset or activated by what their peers may be saying. Why were you given away? I wasn't given away. When my birth mother had me, she wasn't able to take care of me or any baby. I like to add that or any baby. And she wanted me to have parents who could take care of me. And so the adults made a plan. Again, that takes some of the onus off of what I was saying earlier about how children believe they're the cause of the event. So this was a plan made by the adults. Other words that we try not to use are grateful, special, born from you were born in my heart. I hope this translates right, but that phrase, born from my heart, can create a lot of confusion if you're at a holiday dinner and grandpa starts to, says he has heartburn. A lot of times children are like, oh, what's happening in grandpa's heart? So we want to use real language, even with kids. Grateful and special hold there's a lot of pressure if an adopted child is told he or she should be grateful, or you're special, or it's loaded. I can say as an adult adoptee, I'm grateful that I was adopted, but if someone were to say that to me, I would question that, because separating a child from their biology isn't something necessarily that a person internalizes as something to be grateful for. So again, we're just working with helping kids to feel empowered and to know their story and to be able to tell their story in a way that feels comfortable to them. So the fourth one is many adoptees struggle with issues of self-worth, shame, control, trust, and identity. Sometimes we'll see this in kids. They'll adapt in one of two ways: the good adoptee or the bad adoptee. And these are adaptations, so one isn't good or bad. But the way that I explain it is the good adoptee may acquiesce to situations and almost withdraw, just kind of go along, be good, be good, do good, get good grades, some perfectionism, and that is the internal dialogue is, if I'm good and I go along, my family's going to keep me. The bad adoptee, again, not bad, but this is just the adaptation, is testing limits, to see if his or her parents are going to keep them. So when adults can sort of look at these behaviors through the lens of adoption, it's often very helpful, because again, these are adaptations. They're not personality traits. So sometimes when adoptive parents bring their kids in, they will describe them as angry, uncooperative, testing, manipulative. And when we start to get curious about what's underneath the behavior, we see that there's often it's a much more tender and vulnerable emotions: fear, sadness, loneliness, grief, and despair. So again, reminding ourselves that these actions and behaviors are adaptations to that initial separation. They're not personality traits. And when we can start talking about it in that way and addressing the fear or the loneliness or the sadness or the grief, the behaviors will ultimately change. So also adoptees sometimes struggle with shame, and some of the core beliefs that we share are: it's not safe to trust, people leave, I'm not lovable, I'm too much, I'm not enough. And again, if separation was at an early age, this is how the child makes sense of their experience. And I keep saying that, but I'll share an example of an 11-year-old that I was working with, who knew all the circumstances of intellectually, with this part of her brain, she knew why she was adopted. She knew her adoption story. But in my office, she said to me, I think the real reason that my birth mom didn't want me was because I must have kicked too hard when she was pregnant with me. I must have hurt her. So again, we want to help. She needed to hear her story again, right? So she really believed that was the reason. And then, she had believed that. And so she was feeling, she was a kid who blamed herself for a lot of other things too. So we really wanted to get to the root of where that came from. So number 5 is adoptees are in reunion, whether they're formally searching or not. And this is an interesting one, because I think a lot of times parents don't realize how much their kids are thinking about their birth family and their biology. I'll share another example of a little one that I worked with. His parents came in first. This is when I was seeing people in my office, not just on a computer, but the parents came in for the initial visit. I like to get a good history of what's going on. They had a 7-year-old son, and they said he was acting out in school. He was having trouble focusing, and his this was new behavior. He was kind of not focusing, not paying attention, restless. And they wanted him to come and see me. And so I said, well, how have you talked to him about adoption? So he was 7. So kids who are 3, 4, 5, 6-ish, adoption to them is just a word, right? So they think they know they are adopted, you are adopted, adoption's a word, I have a birth family, but it's just all very literal. The parts of the brain that allow for a more nuanced and layered meaning haven't developed. But around 6, 7, 8, those parts of the brain are beginning to develop. So that's when you see kids recognize, oh, wow, I was somewhere else before I came to my family. Someone else carried me and gave birth to me. So the ages 6, 7, 8 is a really important time to start having even more conversations. So back to 7-year-old Ben. So I asked his parents how they talked with him about adoption, and his dad quickly said, oh, this is not about adoption. Ben knows he was adopted. He can talk to us whenever he wants. We told him he can ask questions. He was actually a little, I think, irritated that I even made that connection, which is confusing because they came to see me, an adoption therapist. But so I talked to them a little bit more. The next week, they brought their son in with them, and I asked him, I said, welcome, do you know why you're here? And he said, well, my mom said that you were adopted and you're a feelings doctor. I'm not a doctor, but parents sometimes say that's what I am. My parents said that you were adopted. And I said, I was adopted. Tell me about that. Tell me about adoption. That's all I said. Tell me about adoption. And he said, well, I think about her, the first thing, when I get up in the morning, I think about her. I think about her sometimes when I'm getting ready for school. I think about her when I'm at school. Sometimes I think about her when I get home from school. I always think about her before I go to sleep. I didn't ask this little one, tell me about your birth mother. I just said, tell me about adoption. So my point is that it was on his mind. And as we talked more, he was wondering if she would recognize him, if she lived in their neighborhood, if he had brothers and sisters. So he had all of this on his mind and didn't feel comfortable asking his parents because they weren't talking about it. So, we had about 1.5 meetings, and he was fine. He was fine. He could pay attention. It's hard to do math problems when you're wondering if your birth mother is thinking about you or would recognize you. It's hard to read a book in school if you wonder if you have siblings. So when we provided the answers to this and even gave him they had a few photos of his birth mom, he calmed right down. So there's an author. She's not alive anymore, but she's an author, and she was a therapist and an adoptee. Her name was Betty Jean Lifton, and she wrote about this concept of the ghost kingdom, which is where adoptees. It explains this concept of adoptees fantasizing about their biological family, maybe even fantasizing what it would be like if they had grown up with them. If you haven't read any of her work, it's beautiful work, Betty Jean Lifton. So number 6 is the adoptee's desire to search is not a rejection of the adoptive parents. And this is an important one. So this is, everyone deserves to know their story. It doesn't have to be scary. Histories have a beginning, and an adopted person's beginning wasn't when they came to their adoptive family. So part of knowing who you are is knowing where you came from. So when adoptive parents can provide as much information as they can for their adoptive child, this is really helpful. Back to my search, not having my original birth certificate, I had an amended birth certificate. That's supposed to, here in the United States, I think probably all over the world, that document is supposed to be the most important document you have. And mine is whited out and the names are changed. So that makes it hard to search. A lot of times adopted people don't search until their parents have died. Even if adoptive parents have said, you know, we'll help you search. There's still that internalized sense of I'm going to hurt my parent if I go looking for my first parents, my birth parents. And what happens when adoptees wait until their adoptive parents have died, they search, and then they often find, many of my clients, this has happened to many of my clients, they often find that their birth parents have also died. And then there's this, it's almost like a secondary rejection. If I'm an advocate of openness in adoption, and openness in adoption doesn't mean it's on a spectrum, right? It doesn't mean just exchanging pictures once a year, and it also doesn't mean having Sunday dinner with birth relatives. So when openness is in the best interest of the child and it's safe, it's not a bad idea to utilize it, because then there doesn't have to be a search. And also there doesn't have to be that those periods in a child's life where they're wondering, do I have siblings? Do I have, you know, is my birth mom alive? So again, when it's in the best interest of the child and when it's safe, allowing for some openness. And it does not, a lot of times there's, you know, parents say, well, isn't that confusing for the child? Are they going to know who their parent, you know, are they going to know who their parents are that are caring for them? And there's so many ways to do it in a way that feels pretty organic. I could spend up probably another hour talking about that. A great book, and I'll make sure that I reference this, is The Open-Hearted Way to Open Adoption by Lori Holden, who's an adoptive mom. She does a real beautiful job of writing about openness in adoption. Number 7 is adoptees want to connect and feel connected, even if it doesn't seem like they do. So again, in terms of attachment, sometimes kids seem like they don't want to connect, but they do. As humans, we're wired to connect. So they are striving to find connection and acceptance. Sometimes this is inherent. It just happens with genetic relatives, but adoptees can find connection through support groups, even young ones. Identification with other adoptees, their birth country, their birth culture, and parents can encourage their child's unique interests and share common interests as well. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know if your organization offers an opportunity for your kids to come together and groups in that way. But there are organizations like that where there are parent groups and then groups for the kids too. And I have a virtual teen group that I facilitate twice a month, and it's just remarkable. These kids, I used to do it in person, but when the pandemic happened, we switched to virtual, which has just allowed teens from all over the world to come. It's amazing, and they say things like, "Yeah, you guys just get me." So they may not have had an identical experience, but they feel that that through line of, wow, you were also adopted. It's an amazing group, actually. So number 8, adoption can be hard. So actually, being adopted can be hard, right? So there's nothing really natural about an infant or child being separated from his or her birth parent at birth or later on. And what we know about the brain and the nervous system is when a baby is born, the only part of the brain that is fully developed is the sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight, flight, or freeze response. And the baby needs the comfort of a familiar mom to act as the parasympathetic nervous system. And when that doesn't happen, the baby feels like it's in a dangerous situation. And if someone isn't there with repeated attuned responses, hypervigilance can set in. And what that can look like is anxiety or inability to soothe. And if this separation occurs before there is language to describe it, so between 0 and 3, if that separation occurs, it's just encoded in the nervous system as a pre-verbal or implicit only memory. And that child is going to need his or her parents to talk about exactly that. You might be feeling nervous because of what happened to you when you were just a baby. So they don't have a person that when that trauma happens before they have, like I said, the language, they don't have words to describe it. So I'll have adults in my that I see who'll say like, gosh, every year on my birthday, I have a sinking feeling and I, feel really anxious. Okay. Birthdays are sometimes hard for a person who if that was the same day that they were born, if it was also the same day that they were separated from their birth mom. So again, kids will need, I've had parents who will say, we spent all week preparing for Susie's birthday party. And she was so excited. And then the day of, she won't come out of her bedroom. Okay. So let's talk to Susie about this day, right? This was the day you were born. And it was also the day you were separated from your birth mom, Linda. I like using names for birth parents too, because it actually makes them real people. So Mother's Day can be difficult. Father's Day can be difficult if we're celebrating our adoptive parents, but nobody's talking about our birth parents. Holidays can be difficult too, because kids are sometimes wondering, are their birth parents celebrating that day too? So again, it's being able to bring these people, the extended family of adoption, into the conversation, and almost being one step ahead of your child, right? So birthdays are generally the one that a lot of adopted people struggle with. So just knowing that and being able to help your kids understand that might be why they're upset. For other kids, it might not happen until they're older. I don't think I had issues with my birthday until I started to recognize, oh, wow, this was the day that I was also separated from my birth mom and placed in foster care. And I still liked my birthday, but I think about it more in a different way. So number 9, we want our adoptive parents to be our advocate. I keep repeating that, but it's so important. Earlier, before all of you came on the call, I was asking a little bit more about this organization and who might be here, and was told of adoptive parents, adoptive grandparents, educators, social workers, and that's amazing because we want our parents to be our advocates, but educators can also be our advocates, and social workers obviously too. The school environment can be a great support for adoptive kids and their families if teachers have adoption on their radar. I think trainings need to be implemented in schools and how to talk about adoption, how to do projects that don't make adopted kids feel ashamed. Like I mentioned, the family tree project, or I think in science class doing, talking about DNA and dominant and recessive genes. And, so again, having those can really put kids into an embarrassing situation if they don't know which family they're supposed to, do it for. If they do know about their biological family, they get put on the spot. So, and we want to do this in a way where the child gets to own their story and share as much information as they want to, but also that information gets out there. So when I say we want parents to be our advocate, it doesn't necessarily mean we want parents to go to the school and say, my child was adopted. I think it needs to come from the top down a little bit more. It has to just be a societal thing where, on your child's school records, you click a box, was adopted. When you go to the doctor, this still isn't on medical forms. Do you have a history of X? Do you have, I don't know. I was adopted. So again, it's a reminder that we have a little ways to go. I can give an example of a friend of mine has 2 adopted sons from Kazakhstan, and they're not genetically related. They're both from Kazakhstan. One is white, one is black, and they were in high school, and this was a couple of years ago. And the first day, they both found themselves in the same math class, and the teacher said, "We're going to go around and introduce I want you to introduce yourselves." And the one boy said, I'm David, and Scott is my brother. And the teacher said, quit goofing around, and humiliated them both. So he didn't believe that, a white boy and a black boy could be adoptive brothers. And that shouldn't be happening. Kids who are, there's, in our schools here in the US, they say that there's a zero tolerance for bullying, based on race or religion, intolerance. But I have had clients who have been bullied for their status of being an adopted person. Your mom didn't want you because you're dumb. Your mom didn't want you because you're ugly. And one of my clients finally threw a book at this kid who was bullying her, and she was the one who got in trouble, not the person who was bullying her. So again, it from the top down, some educating of the educators can be really helpful in deepening that advocacy for the adoption community. So the last one, and then I want to open it up to questions, is like Vasya said, adoption is a lifelong journey. Things come and go, things come up along the trajectory of life, and nothing is really linear. Separations and transitions and relationships can sometimes be difficult with a person who has had that early separation. Attuned parents and therapists can help adoptees navigate their experiences so that they can integrate those experiences along the way. Adoptive families tend to seek help from therapists 3 times more frequently than non-adoptive families. Adoptees are overrepresented in mental health and counseling centers and treatment centers. They don't always come in saying, I'm here because I was adopted. So again, we need the mental health field to have adoption and separation loss on their radar. Adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adoptees. And I don't say that to scare anyone. It's that there are issues. So when there are, and if you need to seek mental health treatment, find a therapist who specializes in adoption, one who understands grief, loss, separation trauma, and attachment, and the complexities that go along, so that your child and your family can get the care that you deserve, before waiting a year and having, like I did, having it come up, and then having a therapist who, really minimize the impact of my early experiences on what I was going through. Talk therapy can be helpful. However, I'm a big fan of brain-based therapies, because again, if that trauma occurred for the adopted person before they had language to describe it, they're not going to be able to say what's going on. So we want to use therapies like EMDR. Someone just said brain-based therapy in the chat. So brain-based therapies are therapies that work with the subcortical region of the brain, which is where trauma is stored. And they're excellent for pre-verbal trauma or pre-conscious trauma, where there are no words to describe it because it happened before language was developed. So those therapies are EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I'm trained in that. And brain spotting is another fantastic brain body based therapy. Trauma resiliency model, somatic.
Sorry, did you say brain spotting?
Brain spotting, yes. Yeah. Neurofeedback, sensory motor therapy. I think I said somatic experiencing. Those are all excellent therapies to work, obviously, in conjunction with talk therapy. But they access the subcortical region of the brain, where traumatic experience is stored. So I want to open it up. I've seen a lot of questions come in the chat. I haven't been able to read them, but I want to open it up now to questions from you, from any of you.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Thank you very much.